On the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz comes an unprecedented exhibition about one of history's darkest moments. Auschwitz, not long ago, not far away, features more than 500 original objects, first-hand accounts, and survivor testimonies that tell the powerful story of the Auschwitz concentration camp, its history and legacy, and the underlying conditions that allowed the Holocaust to happen. On now exclusively at ROM. Tickets at rom.ca.
Yedida is back and has been deemed wise enough to earn the title Rabba. What is a Rabba and how is it different from a rabbi? Does Matthew have advice and wisdom to share about her new role? And what is rabbinical school like anyways? I'm Rabbi Avi Finegold, and along with my fellow freelance rabbi Matthew Leibel and Rabba Doctor, or is it Dr. Rabba Yedida Eisenstat, we are not in heaven. All right, well, let's start off by wishing Yedida a mazel tov. You are now officially a rabbah.
Thank you.
Tell us about it. Tell us what happened. How did it go? Highlights, lowlights?
It was great. It was great to be with the group that I've been studying with for 3 years. It's always wonderful to be with everybody in person. The way Maharat does it is they have the great big ceremony for, 500 people in the sanctuary at the Hebrew Institute of Riverdale. But there's another ceremony where they have the rabbis who are giving the ordination sign the clef, the parchment document, like your sort of graduation certificate. There's a real word for that.
Diploma?
Diploma, there it is. Thank you. So we had one of those, and it's a really sweet ceremony, and the chevrutot speak about each other, and they also get to pick a song. It's kind of cheesy, but it was also really beautiful. So it was just really nice to sort of get to talk about my wonderful chevruta, Rabbi Alicia Gechter, and have her also speak about me. And the song that I chose for me was For Good from the musical Wicked, which I hoped everybody understood was sort of meant to be a comment on how the whole experience has changed me for the better. And it was very bittersweet because it was great to be together, but also we knew it was sort of our last time all learning together in that group. We had also told Maharat that because they were bringing us together, that we wanted there to be some real substantive learning. So even after our smicha ceremony and our clef signing that I'll talk about in a minute, Wednesday morning, we still had more shiur, which was wonderful, with the person who's been teaching us all year, who's fabulous. And I wish that I'd, gotten to learn with him for years and years, Rabbi Daniel Reifman. And it was great. And now I have to figure out how I'm going to keep it up. We got a pool membership at the pool that all the modern Orthodox Jews in Kent Mill go to. And I'm thinking about bringing my halacha book so that I can review the laws of Shabbat while watching my kids in the kiddie pool. Because I don't think it will be so engrossing that I will get lost in the book, but also could be engaging and something to be talking about with my fellow pool goer and Rabbah, fellow Canadian Daphne Lazar-Price. So we'll see. We'll see how I keep it up. And I cried through everything, which I also wasn't expecting. I don't know if you could tell in the recording, but I was basically bawling the whole time.
Why weren't you expecting? What were you expecting if you didn't expect that you were going to have big feelings?
So I think I'm a tough guy, even though we've already had plenty of examples on this podcast that I'm not. I never expect to be affected by much, and it catches me off guard when I am. And I kind of was like, oh, okay, whatever. I learned for 3 years, big deal. Sort of rightly or wrongly conceiving of this whole venture as another master's degree. But actually, I think this was harder in some ways, and it really was a challenge. I don't know if the emotions were relief or pride or I never in a million years imagined that I would be a rabbi per se, right? I went and I got a doctorate. I've said for a long time, if I'd wanted to be a rabbi, I would have become a rabbi. Like I got a PhD at the Jewish Theological Seminary where they ordained plenty of women, and I could have done that, except that I didn't at that time and still don't imagine myself to be a capital C conservative Jew. And when they knew that in 3 years Maharat would be closing this program, they called me and they said, "Are you interested now or never?" And right around the time that Maharat called and said now or never, I was putting my daughter to bed. I don't remember why, but she just sort of looked up at me and she's like, "Women can't be rabbis." I was like, she was 3, and I don't know why I took it to heart, but I was like, "What are you talking about? You know, we have women rabbis in our own community. Women of course can be rabbis." And so that felt like a sign that it was time to show her that women could be. And as a kid growing up in Toronto, in sort of straddling conservative and Orthodox Judaism, I didn't have any women rabbi role models, right? Toronto conservative Judaism 30 years ago, I don't think there were any women rabbis. And I just didn't have a role model. And one of the things that Maharat says, which is 100% true, and I am a case in point, is you cannot be what you cannot see, right? It takes real imagination to imagine yourself in a role where you don't have somebody that looks like you in that role. And, you know, we're losing out on 50% of the talent by telling women that they can't do X, Y, or Z. And I went for it. And my boys, my twins they were a year old. They were maybe 14 months old. And it was absolutely, and I had a 3-year-old daughter. Like, it was a crazy time to take on another venture also with a full-time job. It was just, everything about it was crazy, but I did it. And it was really hard. So I think there was just this emotion of like, okay, I did it. And there was a power in the room of there being 100, you know, Maharat having graduated 100 women, and the power of the very impressive women that I was graduating with. It's just, it hit me more than I was expecting, but my husband and my mother were 100% expecting it and were not surprised at all that I was a mess. So, you know.
I envy you actually, Yedida, for the big feelings, because I think I was too young to really appreciate what was happening to me at the time. I was like barely 25, and yeah, it felt like a nice thing, and we moved on, and that was it. Were you a mess, cool. Matthew?
What's that?
Were you a mess?
When I think back to the thing that was kind of tough for me about my actual ordination was that there was an incredibly close family friend's wedding that weekend in Maine, and I told my family, my sister, my parents, to go to it. So my emotional moment, I've had 2 installations. I had my installation later that year, 2017, at Shaar Zedek. That was very emotional. Being at like the shul, seeing the whole congregation on the Saturday morning, our teacher came in. That was really, really amazing. And then just last year, I had an installation here at the Simpkins Center at my new place where I've landed. And those moments, I think, because my family is there, and this, like at Simkin, my kid like knocked over one of the Shabbat candles and started burning down the place. Like it was great, you know. But like those. That stands, like my ordination was cool. My wife Heather was there, and I was wearing my great-grandfather's talit, which has been used for like every chuppah in the family, including mine. And I was wearing it, and even though I don't like the big talis, like because you're always constantly fixing it, so like those things were kind of cool.
You're a shawl kind of guy.
Oh, I'm the more svelte the shawl can be, the better. But like there were moments, but I like sharing that with like the people who I think put in all the work to you know, tolerate me when I was young and support me. So I liked them being in the crowd. So the fact that you got that there for yours was money. Super cool.
Yeah. I tend to be very shoveled, if you know what I mean.
As opposed to disheveled.
Yes.
Yeah.
And when I have there are times of the many accessories that I might have for the black tie look when I'm wearing a tuxedo, I do have a white like silk scarf, and everybody calls it my reformed talit.
Nice.
Because it just comes off exactly like that. But
yeah, no, I love that. I love the excuse. Like on Yontif, when we would wear the white gowns, I still do when I do my Rosh Hashanah services at Yom Kippur. That felt like an excuse because everybody in the choir had it as like a shawl. So I couldn't I couldn't show them up. I had to do it. We all had to go shawl. So it was like an excuse. I loved it. I want to echo what Avi said, Mazel Tov. And I guess welcome to the club, though it feels like a weird thing to welcome people to. I would discourage people from joining the club. But welcome to the club. And I wanted to know more, like, for you, now that you've been through it, like the graduation experience sounds amazing, but how do you feel different now that you're a rabbi?
I feel a little bit lighter because I don't have the pressure on me that I have felt sort of for the last 3 years of trying to keep my head above water in this program. I'm still trying to figure out how changed I feel, is the honest answer. One thing that I really appreciated about the process and the many conversations sort of leading up to graduation with different people in the leadership of Yeshivat Maharat, like Rav Avi Weiss asked me what I think that halacha is. And it was nice to be able to articulate and have a conversation about that. And also to think about what being a rabbi means to me and what I think that my role and how I will serve the Jewish people. So that all, I think, was really beneficial, sort of having to, really think about that and articulate it rather than just sort of like be caught up in the program and checking all the boxes and passing the tests. So
I've been telling friends and colleagues about you, just because you mentioned Rabbi Avi Weiss, and when I met him, when I was in grade 10, my high school sent a delegation to Yeshiva University's Model United Nations, and we had this kind of thing where we stayed in the Bronx with a contact, and then he took us on Friday night to Hebrew Institute. He took us to the shul, and two stories that I love when I think back to that, because I was 16, and now I'm 40. Was that on Friday night, Rabbi Weiss went to the door before everybody and hugged everyone as they left. Does he still do that? And then we went to his house and we had dessert and we benched, and then we went down to his basement, and my classmates and I, there were 10 of us. He told us all these stories about how he got arrested in the 60s and the 70s for protesting things like Vietnam, and just I had no sense at the time who he was, and I haven't really thought of him. Of course, he's the founder of the program that you just, we're the class that put it up to 100 graduates, Orthodox women, the whole thing is revolutionary. He's totally my kind of guy. But I've been thinking a lot and telling people about about our podcast and about you becoming a rabbi and that story, the story with him.
He's definitely a hugger, and he's definitely a protester, get arrested for the causes he believes in, kind of rabbi. So those stories, are his essence.
Awesome.
So if you look at the timeline of women in the rabbinate or women in clergy positions in the Orthodox community, you start seeing decades ago the desire to have women serve in these roles, but not even having women learning for ordination, let alone thinking that you could. So they would start using the titles for example, congregational intern or community scholar. Euphemisms, really, really very euphemistic language. And a lot of the great teachers of today that are out there had those roles early on when they would graduate from Drisha, from the graduate program in advanced Talmud studies at Yeshiva University at Stern College. And they just didn't have titles for them. So they just gave them, this thing. And one of the features, I guess, of Yeshivat Maharat is that because there is not really a precedent in the Orthodox community for these titles, you sort of get to pick your own title.
So one title I knew I would not take is Maharat, which was sort of the original title for the first woman who Rav Avi Weiss ordained 17 years ago.
2010, so 15 years ago. And the title Maharat, for those of you who don't know a little bit of the inside baseball on this, is when the first person was being ordained, there was this big fear around the R word. There was a lot of discussion around, we're not going to call them rabbis. They're just being ordained. We don't want to rock the boat too much. And so they came up with this title that was basically Maharat, which stood for Manhiga Hilchatit Ruchanit Toranit. So it's imagine if you're a doctor and we say, well, we can't really call you doctor. We're just going to call you somebody who can heal people and prescribe things and give you checkups and diagnose illnesses. And for a while that worked. And then I think people grew less fearful of the title, or I think people got emboldened and just started saying, hey, I just want to use this title. And you started seeing people either making the shift or not picking up the title to begin with. You picked the title Rabbah, and I know that other people picked other titles, as your chavruta picked the title Rabbi. Was there a process when you guys were discussing like what title to pick and how to make that decision?
So I wanted a title for me that people would know what it means. And Rabbah is close enough to rabbi that I think that maybe it resonates. In some contexts, I'm sure I'll just use rabbi when that feels like the right thing to do for me. Different women chose different titles, but the title piece has been kind of fraught since Maharat started graduating graduates, rabbis, women in leadership who are authorized to teach Torah and make halachic decisions. It seems in Israel, rabbanit was a much more popular choice. The youngest in our group, who is a teacher at Ein HaNatziv in the Midrasha there, is of Yemenite descent, and she went with Chachama, which I love. For people who don't know Hebrew, that's the feminine version of Chacham, which is what that community calls their male leaders.
By the way, I just want to say really quickly, I have no problem with it whatsoever, and I'll call you Rabbah and like happily, but I just want my position to be known. I kind of think it's ridiculous that no one was allowed to just say they're rabbis from the beginning. Are we all inside with that? Like, I kind of think rabbi is rabbi, doctor is doctor. Like, I don't really gender these sorts of things. Is that okay to say that?
Oh, yeah. That's why I think in lots of contexts, like my new business cards from work are going to say rabbi because nobody knows what rabbah is.
Awesome. Okay. I'm for it. I'm for it. Okay, great. I'm also for rabbah, though, and that's what I'll call you, but yeah.
I first want to ask you, Avi, your spouse, the woman to whom you are married, was in the first not Rabba Sarah graduating class, which I think was in 2012?
2013.
2013. And I'm curious what her process in choosing a title was, because everything was far more fraught then than it is now. Now I feel like, 100 graduates, like there's nothing special here. This is just normal now.
Yeah. So she did write an article about it, and so you can check out online what the process was and how she
she got a shul job pretty early, which is kind
she
of
had
a
a
big
job.
deal.
So her first job actually was in 2007. In Chicago. She was basically called director of education. I don't remember the specific title. When she moved to Montreal, it was director of education and spiritual enrichment. But by that point, she had the title. And the way that they gave her an R word was that she held the rabbanit chair of the synagogue, but there was no actual chair. Nobody ever called her that. She was basically just Rachel to everybody. So she was definitely one of those people that started studying at Yeshivat Maharat for the job that she already had. But she did start with the title Maharat, which I think was very useful for the types of work that she was doing. As people got comfortable with her within the congregation, she had a better ability to articulate who she was and what she was doing. She made that shift to the title Rabbah, and she wrote an article about it and explained her process. And I'm not going to speak for her. You can go and read it. But in short, it was really saying, like, look, this is probably the more accurate and more apt title. And now that other people are using it, it's time to really recognize the work that I'm doing and put it in the pantheon of all other works that's happening.
Was she well received? Was it just like normal and everybody was like, or was there like
No.
a lot of excitement that there was like a woman on the clerical staff?
I remember in Chicago in the first job, there was always a few people, for example, that would walk out of shul anytime she spoke. And this is like 3, 4, 5 years in. They would just like refuse, and they would do it in a semi-respectful way, but then even then it wasn't so much. But those people eventually like moved on. If they really had a problem with it, they stopped coming. But for the most part, there's always apprehension, and then there's a shift. And I think that by the time 2013 came around and she was at a shul that was more traditional, right? I like to joke the Shaar Hashomayim in Montreal is pre-denominational, because it's almost 175 years old. And so there was no denominations when it actually started, and they haven't done anything since. So there was a little bit of apprehension, but I think that as soon as she started working and she had the confidence, she was doing the things, there was a lot more acceptance very early on. So there's always pushback. There's always things that are difficult, but it's not really for me to be able to talk on her behalf. But yeah, absolutely.
I thank you. I totally appreciate that. I think also, like, at this point in 2025, I have very little patience for the people who get up and walk out. personally. And for me, a huge reason for why I opted into this program was the learning. I was like really excited about the learning and somebody teaching me and being challenged and learning how to do a new thing. The program that I was in was really just studying halacha. It wasn't the pastoral pieces. There's like a lot more in the full core, full-time Maharat program, but this was just studying halacha. And it felt sort of like a feminist choice for me because it is my understanding that in other Orthodox institutions that grant smicha, that it's just studying halacha and getting tested in it. And so for me, I was like, well, I can learn how to do this thing just as well as any man. And if they can, I can.
Matthew, what was your experience like in rabbinical school? Because I know you also went to a to a school that was not one of the major, theological seminaries.
Yeah, totally. I went through this program called JSLI, Jewish Spiritual Leaders Institute, that's run by Rabbi Stephen Blaine, and he's based in New York. And at the time, he was cantor, Annabelle Mass. Now he's Rabbi Annabelle Mass. He was the cantor at Shaar Zedek. For 12 years, I'd been the Chazan Sheni, the Torah reader, and bar mitzvah teacher, and then I'd started doing some weddings and whatever, all that kind of stuff. And the senior rabbi, Rabbi Green, was retiring, and we were kind of looking at options, and attracting rabbis was kind of, it's tough, I think, in the best of times. It was tough in Winnipeg. It didn't seem very promising. And Yibal found this program in New York, and we did it. It was a year. You needed to qualify for it, and it's kind of set up like a trade school, a year of online learning. This was even pre-COVID for us. And the program was cool. Every week it was, a whole, there was a topic, and it was a whole list of stuff you had to research ahead of time.
Can I interrupt here?
Yeah, of course. Go ahead.
Okay. You were a sports broadcaster.
Yeah, it's true.
So I think that's a shift.
To become a rabbi?
Are there overlapping
but he was also,
skills?
to be fair, but he was also, he was also the Chazan Sheni at the shul, and he was reading Torah, and he was doing weddings. So
Yeah, but also the sports radio thing, it was a dream job, but my schedule was I was waking up every day at 3:30 in the morning, and the lifestyle of that kind of job, a very volatile industry. In the time since I left, that station in Winnipeg completely folded in the middle of the morning. One morning it was there, one morning it was not, So that all the stuff became apparent by the time we started making big plans for our future and talking about kids, getting married, turning 30, all that stuff, a decade or whatever ago. But also, and I tell this story, this is the big story for me, and it's funny because we're podcasting, but for all my years of journalism school and for all the years on the radio, and I loved it, and you can reach so many people, mass media, after all, is what it's called. But when you can't see your audience's face, it starts to get you. And when you have what I had at the same time, 5 days a week, I was doing radio shows to a faceless audience other than my co-hosts. You don't know how a joke lands. You don't know if they get your trying to make a point, give you a take, whatever. But in synagogue, I was storytelling. I was doing the exact same kind of thing, different topic, but you could see people's faces. The level of engagement and connection for, at that time in my life, a pulpit rabbi, or even when I do those kinds of things now, a wedding, a funeral, any kind of event, when you have your live audience, it's a totally different level of just kind of your connection with them, right?
I got to interrupt you on this one because speaking of the level of engagement and podcasting, this happened to me over Shabbat, and we can get into the whole it was my daughter's bat mitzvah this past Shabbat. A lot of people came in from out of town, and I've made all the things. I've made cheese bagels, Montreal cheese bagels, and there's wine, and there's all sorts of cocktails, and I'm serving everything. And somebody who I know, who's a friend of mine, is like, "Oh, I heard the podcast this week. This is last week's podcast." And he's like, "I'm not sure if I should tell you because it's Shabbat afternoon, whether you want to know about something that just happened." And he clearly had heard the news that America had just bombed Iran, and he wanted to know if I wanted to. And I was like, oh, this rarely happens, that the very week that you talk about something on the podcast, that it comes up again, and that somebody who listened actually will come up to you and be like, this is a moment where something significant just happened, and I heard you talk about the fact that you don't need to know. And I'm like, at that point, you kind of have to tell me.
It just reminds you that when people do listen to you and you're part of mass media, they could walk up to you on the street and be part of a conversation you don't remember them being at.
Yeah. Let's take a quick pause here for a message from our sponsor.
On the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz comes an unprecedented exhibition about one of history's darkest moments. Auschwitz, not long ago, not far away, features more than 500 original objects, first-hand accounts, and survivor testimonies that tell the powerful story of the Auschwitz concentration camp, its history and legacy, and the underlying conditions that allowed the Holocaust to happen. On now exclusively at ROM. Tickets at rom.ca.
Can I go back to the thing that your rabbinical school and ask, like, what was the type of material that you were learning?
So every week there would be a different major topic. Like a colleague of mine who did it a few years later described it as a trade school. One week we talked about circumcision. So the breadth of all of the knowledge on circumcision, but also with a very kind of keen look at New Age phenomenon. What do you do with families who don't want to do circumcision and want to do a Brit Shalom ceremony? Where do you... And kind of opening it up to us. Look, you're all non-Orthodox rabbis. That was kind of the pitch. You have to figure out the community that you're in and where you fit in it. But you need to start thinking about where your position is on circumcision. So a real kind of run the gamut conversation of circumcision, from what are the process steps so that you need to know if you're asked, like involved in getting a moil and all these kinds of things, and what's the halacha and what's the story and Abraham and all that stuff, all the way down to, look, you're probably going to get people coming to you being like, we don't want to do circumcision. So what do you do? So that's 1 week. And every week you had to write a Devar Torah as well. Not unlike our show. Little technical here. So over the course of a year, it was a pretty comprehensive kind of the year in the life of the rabbinic intern was the way it was for me that year that I was at Shaar Zedek 2016 to 17. And after that, we became rabbis.
No, I think that the framing of your program is actually great because it acknowledges that leaders, all kinds of leaders and spiritual leaders and religious leaders included, need to be able to encounter people where they are.
Right.
And
Totally.
It sounds like you were really properly trained to do that. And I think given sort of the range of Jews and their engagement, and that Jews seem to come to rabbis in moments when, for example, a baby is born and they're trying to figure out how to ritualize that properly and enter that child into the covenant, which requires circumcision. Like those are really important moments.
Yeah.
And that's a hard conversation. So it sounds like, and real leaders need to be able to have them.
For the record, I always feel for like our audience isn't still kind of like meeting us. Maybe they know Avi, but they're still meeting us. I'm happy to share. I'm very much pro-circumcision. I'm very much pro-circumcision. I have to kind of navigate, what do you do when you inherit a 13-year-old boy once have a bar mitzvah who didn't get circumcised 13 years ago when you were a rabbi? That's a different sort of situation. I don't try to turn people away. I'm try to make the tent bigger. I've been on the record saying that. So it's not like this is an alternative program where everyone comes out saying we're not doing circumcision. And I'm not alone in this. I think there's a number of people. So it really did cover the whole scope, which is, like you said, Yedida, like why it was such a cool program for me. Plus, like Rabbi Blaine himself is also very musical, and I'm a sucker for when your Friday night, like part of your exam is you have to lead a Friday night service, and I got to do it with the keyboard. Like, that was fun. That's good too. Right?
I have lots of questions for you because you guys have been in this game much longer than I have, which is, more than 8 days. 8 days. But what have been like the hardest situations you've been in, if you feel comfortable sharing in your rabbinic roles?
What do you mean by the hardest?
You get to decide, I'm sure like something is popping in your head or 4 different scenarios and you can pick one.
Well, I always joke now that one of the hardest things that we figured out after the fact is that like ordination is like a genetic disease, right? It's kind of like, it's okay if you're a carrier, you're just not supposed to marry another one.
Did you come up with that? Is that yours?
Totally.
So we have that problem also. My almost 4-year-old the other day after my test on like Thursday morning, 10 days ago, at dinner that night, he'd had his graduation from pre-K 3 at dinner. He turned to us and said, "Am I a rabbi now?"
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
I love that.
So, I mean, that one needs navigation, to be fair. That was really tough for me to make that step back and to like say, hey, I could be doing other things. I'm going to take the step back because my wife's job, my wife's career is taking off, and she's clearly the one that the community needs to see. We need more of these out there in the world. And that was difficult. And then trying to take the step back in after a long time has been just as difficult, in that, like, I feel like I have a lot of the skills that are needed. I do a lot of life cycle events. I have given many sermons in the times when I was an interim rabbi and in other situations. And I think I write a pretty damn good sermon. And, you know, I have all that, but it's hard to convince any sort of congregation or any sort of, you know, person that, like, I actually have a lot of rabbinical skills and I'm able to, like, move that forward. So that has been difficult for me. So, but that's more circumstantial. So, but even how that applies to you is to sort of, like, you're going to kind of have to be wary of the fact that as a non-pulpit rabbi, people don't really know what to make of you, right? Automatically, people are going to ask you, especially if they're not Jewish, what congregation are you with?
Right. So
even if they are Jewish, if they're not, like, you know, they don't know you well, they're automatically going to assume if you're a rabbi that you have a pulpit, and to have to, like, can tell them I'm not that kind of rabbi.
That's the name of my autobiography, by the way.
Well,
that's the name of my autobiography.
That was the name of a well-known podcast on the CJN Podcast Network, Not That Kind of Rabbi, but with Ralph Ben Mergi, which, incidentally, by the way, Ralph is now the head of Aleph Canada, which is the professional association of the Reconstructionist rabbis around the world, but Aleph Canada is specifically for the Canadian ones. So we can wish him a mazel tov for that, and you can look out for more Ralph stuff elsewhere.
He appeared once on Just for Laughs as well, if you want to try and search that out. I don't know
there
if it is,
go.
but he was once on Just for Laughs. True story. There was something that I was supposed to answer too, wasn't there?
Yeah, what's been hard for you?
So, like, my path to non-pulpit rabbi started as pulpit rabbi, right? Like, I specifically left the radio to be the rabbi at Shaar Zedek. I didn't want to go and be moving around or doing anything. It was to be Shaar Zedek, which was where I had grown up, which is where I had not only worked for 12 years already, but also where it had my bar mitzvah. Like, it was super cool. It was a great opportunity. And for the majority of my years, that was great. But my warning is that if you ever do go into the pulpit life, you don't. Like, I think that if you can exist outside of it, it's that balance between work and the job. You know, when the job starts interfering with work because of factors that aren't your career, I think that's just an inevitability in certain levels of pulpit rabbi. It wasn't always the case, but when it goes sideways, and it's really, really difficult. And, you know, I one of the reasons I resisted being rabbi for a long time was I was very good friends with the son of the rabbi when we were 8 to 10 growing up in Winnipeg, and then they moved, right? It was devastating, and he had to move a whole bunch of times. I remember he had to shave because his beard was white, and he was looking too old, he said, to get hired for a job. Like, this was his life. 4 or 5 different houses, different cities across North America, had to shave his face for his job, no security, no stability. I don't want that kind of life. Like, I'm not joking around here. Like, I wish all of these people well. I totally do. But that's the kind of stress that I just can't handle. So
although when you do get a stable pulpit rabbi position, it is one of the most stable jobs in the Jewish community.
It's gold. It's gold. It's just in small towns like Winnipeg, I just wonder if there's a little just too much volatility in those shuls, or if in the industry to begin with, like, the shul industry is not great.
The reverse of that used to be true, in that small towns were a great place for somebody who was a young rabbi to go and say, great, I'm going to move to Fredericton, and I'm going to be there for the next 50 years, basically, and I'm going to be the community's rabbi, and they're going to be my flock, and that's it. I know that happened, for example, in Fredericton. It happened in Moncton. It happened in, you know, many other small towns across Canada.
I've been to all those shuls, by the way. I love the East Coast. When I was there and I worked for the Atlanta Jewish Council, shout out to those shuls. Amazing.
On the one hand, yes, the precarity and the beholdenness to the board and making sure that you have the clique and the right kind of connection to the community that they want to keep you forever. All of that is really complicated and essential on the one hand. On the other hand, again, like, if you have that 30, 40, 50-year relationship with the community, and, you know, you're there when the kids are born, and you're there at their b'nai mitzvah, and you're there when they get married, like, there's something really beautiful about it. And, like, when my husband talks about serving as a pulpit rabbi and a community rabbi, like, one of the things he talks about is that it's the greatest honor to be able to, like, help people through those moments. And it's just such a privilege to be with people through their lives. And there's something beautiful about that, but there's also something devastating when the community is like,
I've had it all of exactly once. I had one student of mine that was a bar mitzvah student that I then did the wedding for, their wedding. So like, because of the freelance nature and because I don't do that many bar mitzvahs. But yeah, it's an amazing feeling to be standing under this person's chuppah and you did their bar mitzvah and you remember them growing up even the years before that. I'm
lucky being in Winnipeg, right? Like even though I left the Shaar Zedek, I stayed in Winnipeg. And because I had such a long run starting as a bar mitzvah tutor, I have had that. It's your husband is bang on. It's the coolest feeling in the world on both sides of the coin. When somebody dies, and this just happened to me, and a family thinks to contact me in that moment, that's an incredible honor. When two people get engaged and they call you, I mean, like we feel that all the time. But when you also are of the place, right? Like because I work as a rabbi in the city where I live, in the city where I'm from, and I went to school with people. Like we're 40 now, and I've got contemporaries who are starting to plan their kids' bar and bat mitzvahs. Like that's an insane thing. We were all in grade 1 together. Now we have a kid having a bar mitzvah, and they're thinking about me being able to be the rabbi or me being able to do the wedding. Like that's
it's a huge honor.
It's incredible. It's an amazing feeling. It's super, super cool. So yeah, I'm not discounting that at all. You can only be a rabbi if you have people who make you their rabbi, right? Like you can't just be a rabbi without doing much as a rabbi, and people really inform a lot of that, I think.
You're getting ahead of yourself. That's for the Parshat Korach thing later.
Oh.
Hold on.
Sorry.
Hold on. So I wanted to ask you also, like the flip side for both of you, and I hope I haven't just ruined it, but what's the most fulfilling piece of your rabbinate for you?
It's a hard way to describe this, but there was a fellow. Yeah, I mean, I feel weird about telling this story. Hang on, maybe I'll tell a different story instead. There was one time where I found out after the fact that a fellow of mine who I had done a wedding for him, and then he got sick and he was dying. He was going in for surgery. And okay, I will tell you the story. He was going in for surgery, and I found out after the fact that he was going for the surgery with like a 50-50 chance, and the guy he was with, his best friend, he kind of grabbed him as they're wheeling him out, and he said to him, "If anything happens, call Matthew Leibel." And when I heard that story after the fact, and more so the hearing it, but also the telling my dad that story, that it's a really sad story because ultimately he's my friend, and he did die after the fact, not in that surgery, but shortly after. And I did his funeral, and it was brutal. It's tough, but that feeling of like that was on that guy's mind, like that was on that guy's mind at that moment in his life, that I should be a part of whatever was waiting for him. Like that is. I try not to think about that too much because you can see I don't have a completely great handle on that moment. But it's a sad story that confirms that the whole – but I've had a lot of those. I've had a little boy looking up at me with like the fear of reading from the Torah and me telling him he's going to be okay and being there. And I've had wedding couples and being under there, and like you get really, really close access to a lot of fulfilling moments of people's lives, like life moments. It's unbelievable.
Yeah, I will echo that absolutely. But I don't get them as often. I had a moment when a friend of mine calls me up and says, my mom's dying, and we always thought that she was going to live to see my son's bar mitzvah, and it doesn't look like she's going to make it. What can we do? And I was like, well, he was about 11. I was like, okay, this is what we're going to do. We're going to buy his tefillin today. Because I was like, she was like, it was happening the next few days. I said, we're going to buy his tefillin today, and we're going to go to the hospital, and he's going to try them on for the first time today with his bubby who bought him his tefillin. And she's going to see it at least, and he's going to say the Shema. It's going to be the first time practicing, and then he'll put them away, and he'll know when he puts on his tefillin for his bar mitzvah that, that he has that connection with Bubby, and Bubby will always have that, like she'll be there or whatever it was. And it was tremendously moving. So like that's there, but that doesn't happen that often, and it's great to know that people call you for that. And so that is absolutely incredibly rewarding. For me, it's often the teaching, because at heart I see myself as more of an educator and doing a lot of like transmitting of knowledge, and when you teach a class that gets like you knock it out of the effing park, right? Like it's just, it lands, every metaphor that you've put in there, every source connects, every line works, and people walk out of there transformed. That really works for me so much. And I got to say that in a way, because I really see my writing now almost as a pulpit. Like I read a lot for the CJN, for the Scribe, quarterly for the magazine of the CJN, and I'm doing a lot of Torah-based writing. And like when I get to have that time to think and to put together a piece that really works well together, it's really great. And that to me is absolutely rewarding in the rabbinate.
Cool.
When Rav Avi asked me, how I saw myself as a rabbi, that's basically what I described as an educator, but also as a conduit into the tradition, right? Somebody comes with a question, they're struggling with something, and just being in conversation with them and offering them what Judaism has to offer to help them through that moment. I
like to say, I say this in terms of like, it's a bit of a warning against people that are very highly charismatic. And, charisma is always suspect in my mind. And I always say that the role of the educator is not to be the center of attention. And primarily the role of the educator is to be the lube between the material and the student. And that's all that you're supposed to be. You get yourself out of there. And if you need charisma to do that, then great. But you get out of the way and you teach and you get it. It's more about the student than it is about you. Let's try to seg from that into a new segment.
Textual healing. It's time for some textual healing. Let's get biblical. Tell me a parsha.
I mean, it's an old segment. It's what we've been doing about Torah in the but we're calling it something new and we're having some fun with it.
Textual healing. It's time for some textual healing.
Yedida, do you want to kick us off with some textual healing?
When I get that feeling.
I do. It's kind of fortuitous that the week that we're talking about our rabbiness. So Korach, this week's Parsha, we are met with yet another challenge to Moshe and in this case, Aaron's leadership. And Korach leads a band of rebels, other leaders in the wilderness who come to Moshe and say, hey, we're all holy. Rashi explains also that in their claim to all be holy, like we all heard God at Mount Sinai, like who made you king? Who put you in charge? And Moshe has to get himself out of that situation. And much of the thrust of the narrative really is to reinforce the legitimacy of Moshe and Aaron's leadership. And amidst all of this, the parts that's interesting to me, as we've all just discussed, sort of what being a rabbi means to us, I think there are a lot of leadership lessons in this week's Parsha. Among them, and perhaps sort of something that could have preempted the story for whatever reason, these months I'm very into sort of alternative ways these narratives could have gone if everybody had behaved better. But I kind of wonder if Moshe had seen the potential, right, and given other people maybe more opportunities or seen the potential in others also to lead, if he might have averted this crisis, right? Part of their complaint is you and Aaron are doing all the holy stuff. You're the only ones who really, come into close contact with God, but we're all holy. Why can't we all do that? So there are reasons. But I think, of the many leadership lessons here, one of them is see people, find out what their potential is and help them realize it. And I think also that as rabbis, part of what our job is to get to know the community, the people, and find out what motivates them and figure out how they can make their individual contributions to the Jewish people and to their larger communities, for example. Anyway, I think that this Parsha is just absolutely full of examples like that.
Ooh, I like that take, even though I don't think I agree with it. I like it. I never really heard it before. I always saw Korach as just pure evil. Just absolute pure, like the way the rabbis kind of saw him. I always like the idea, the lesson. I just taught this for a bar mitzvah student. First of all, I love the stuff about leadership. You're 100% right. He's a huge hockey player. He talked all about, what it means to be a good captain in hockey. It was fantastic. It was absolutely fantastic. But I personally always loved the whole, an argument for the sake of heaven, an argument not for the sake of heaven angle, right? For the people who may not know, is that the rabbis talk about how Korach's argument with Moses was an argument not for the sake of heaven. It was totally selfish and self-driven. He was all about himself, his arrogance, his pride, all this kind of stuff, his ambition, Korach's, that is. Whereas Hillel and Shammai, who disagreed on everything, their arguments were for the sake of heaven, right? And this kind of like comparison for leaders to be able to recognize, I think it's interesting, it's in a similar vein, Yedida. Recognizing talents in people is a great leadership quality, but you also have to recognize their flaws.
Sure.
You have to recognize their flaws, particularly when they start becoming a threat to the community. Because that can happen too. Not everybody's cut out to be a leader, and the wrong kind of leaders can set back businesses, sports, governments, shuls, big time. So, yeah.
Bigly.
Bigly. Ooh.
I'm going to go in a different direction with this, actually. Later on in the story, Moshe goes to Aharon, to his brother, and says the staff that he's holding on to, that he's always holding on to, his own staff, he is to take his staff because it had been used for a miracle. That's what the commentaries talk about. And that he can no longer use it, and he has to place it in the tabernacle, in the Mishkan, because, right, you don't want this thing to become a talisman of like, hey, we're going to start worshiping this thing which had miracles attached to it. And I think that that's a real interesting leadership moment, especially because in the beginning of the chapter, something else happens with like stuff, right? Where the fire pans can't be, they're like, well, they're too holy to use, but they're also like, they were involved in something unkosher, right? In this like rebellious, offerings or whatnot. And so they become part of the altar. They get hammered into like being part of the plating for the altar. And so there's this notion of like, what do you do with stuff and what do you do with the details? And I think that that's always a great leadership moment to be able to say, I don't just think about the big picture. Right. I'm worried about like, sweating the small stuff. I was the chair of Limud here in Chicago for when the first time I was in Chicago. And there's a really big principle when it comes to Limud that no matter how high you are up in the org chart, your job, if you see garbage on the floor, is to pick it up. And that's a big leadership, responsibility. It's a point of like saying you're never too big enough, you're never too high enough to clear somebody else's like lunch if they forgot. And that's the Limud principle. And Moshe shows this by saying, I care about the fire pans and I care about the staff. So that to me is like a big leadership thing.
Cool.
All right. Well, Yedida, thank you so much for that. That's actually was very, very thought-provoking. And mazel tov again. And let's regroup again in a week when you will be a rabbi twice as long as you will have been right now.
Ooh, that's true, isn't it?
Yeah. Still a baby rabbi, though.
Still. Thank you for listening to Not in Heaven this week. Our producer and editor is Zachary Kaufman. Michael Freeman is the executive producer. To catch every episode, subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. If you'd like to support our show, consider making a donation to the CJN at thecjn.ca/donate.
On the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz comes an unprecedented exhibition about one of history's darkest moments. Auschwitz, Not Long Ago, Not Far Away, features more than 500 original objects, first-hand accounts, and survivor testimonies that tell the powerful story of the Auschwitz concentration camp, its history and legacy, and the underlying conditions that allowed the Holocaust to happen. On now exclusively at ROM. Tickets at rom.ca.